Thanks for joining us and welcome back to the Watchman on the Wall podcast. Periodically, we'll bring you true stories of angelic encounters, heavenly visitations, near-death experiences, as well as modern-day prophecies that are relevant to us today. When we come back, we'll begin our next episode. Do you want to make a podcast? Spotify's got a platform to let you make one super easy, then distribute it everywhere and even earn money. It's all in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. So no matter what your setup is like, you can start recording and creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. And best of all, it's totally free with no catch. The Watchman on the Wall podcast has been using Spotify for Podcasters for the last 4 years, and we highly recommend it. So give it a try and download the Spotify for Podcasters app, or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started. Hello and welcome back to the Watchman on the Wall podcast. Today we're going to hear from Chris Reed. We've had several programs with Chris Reed this year. Today he was on a religious talk show, and I thought it was very fascinating the things he did. He talked about many of the prophecies that he's been given and visions, and he discusses them today on this talk show. I believe you'll find this very fascinating, and I find Chris Reed to be very credible. Today he speaks with Joni Lamb on the television show Table Talk, and today he discusses many of the prophecies he's gotten for the year 2023 and beyond. So here now is Chris Reed speaking with Joni Lamb.
Well, he is the pastor and author, and he's here to reveal more about what the Lord has been prophetically showing him. Please welcome Chris Reed. That sounds like very prophetic music. How are you doing?
Great. How are you?
I'm good. It's so good to have you all the way from North Carolina, because, you know, I was born in South Carolina, so right next to each other.
Yep. Well, we're actually just into South Carolina.
Right. Well, you know, you've written a new book, The Seven Spirits of God, Experiencing Throne Room Realities, and we may touch on it for just a moment, but I know people today want to hear about what God is saying, and prophetically the Lord has used you that way and has shown you some very significant things. So let's just get right into that. Maybe talk a little bit about how did you first know, or how old were you when the Lord kind of started using you prophetically and you knew something was up, and did you know how to steward that gift? Was there anybody there to help you?
Well, no. The Pentecostal stream I grew up in focused a lot on tongues, the baptism of the Spirit, but not so much on the prophetic. And so I was a pastor for a number of years, started pastoring at 25. I was baptized in the Spirit at 8 years old, so I've always, I was the kid sitting on the front row ever since I was little. And then in 2018, I was found by a minister who was a well-known prophetic voice, Paul Cain, and Paul Cain actually found some of my stuff online ministering and had his assistant reach out to me and said, "There's a man on the earth that has a gift like mine. It's him. I want you to find him." So I talked to Paul, went out and met him. And then so after that, it kind of began to accelerate, and I got to meet, Rick Joyner. And so I got pulled into the Morning Star world. And so I guess I've sort of really begun to be trained and mentored in the prophetic really in the last 4 or 5 years.
What did you think when Paul Cain came to you?
I was shocked.
Did you know you were prophetic when he came to you?
Yeah, because in 2011, I went through a really difficult time in my life, and I started having these nighttime encounters. Oh, wow. And I knew that something was changing, and I just started knowing things about people. Oh, and, you know, little by little, I began to test it and verify it, know somebody was sick or had cancer, heart disease or whatever. And then it accelerated into, I mean, like in meetings, like calling people out and going into visions. I would actually see the dreams they would have the night before, tell them in detail. So it's, you know, and then world events, and, you know, there's been several things that we've prophesied that have happened even in the last year. So
let's talk about that. Specifically, we won't get to all of them, I'm sure, but there were 38 specific things that God began to show you. And one of them, we'll start with this one. I'll start, y'all. I'll call on you. We'll go down the list. China.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the Lord really began to show me 3 or 4 years ago that China was going to temporarily become the world's superpower for a season, not forever. But while simultaneously they were expanding their tentacles into all the earth, there's an internal revolution brewing in China right now. The people are hungry and desirous for freedom.
And you've got the underground church, which is the largest church in
the
the
Lord
world.
told me on October the 1st, I had the prophecy about an internal revolution in China. The Lord told me the below ground church is about to see above ground results.
Wow.
And that I think over the next few years, we're going to see the fall of the Communist Party. And I know that sounds crazy, but I've seen this. And there will be a form of democracy come to China, and we will see China kind of devolve into a few states that will have varying levels of democracy and freedom.
But not without a fight.
Not without a fight.
Wow. Cindy?
Wow. It looks like maybe that the Lord also was showing you about crime getting worse, rioting, and we are seeing all of that. And there are people that are fed up with the government.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no doubt. One of the things that I saw is that mass illegal immigration was going to continue to really accelerate all over the world, not just, you know, from South Central America up into the United States, but even from Africa up into Europe. And that what would happen, even in Europe, there'd be many nations who would become sick of the illegal immigration that was taking place, and it would actually cause a restarting of patriotism and love of nation. And it's actually going to be a surprise result that I think the globalist one world spirit didn't see coming, that they were actually going to cause these nations to develop a love for national sovereignty and patriotism again in the U.S. and in Europe.
I believe that, because I think we are fed up with the way the government's turning and trying to control our lives and take our freedom away.
Yep.
For sure. Rebecca?
President Joe Biden's health will continue to fail?
I do not believe that Biden will finish his time in office. I have been saying that since 2021. I feel like that he is a puppet.
It's true.
And I don't think he'll finish his time in office. I think that he will try to redeem his failed presidency, because even the media is turning against him now. How he will redeem his history is he will, by stepping aside, he will give us the first woman president. And with liberals, that will gain him a lot of, even though I'm all for us having a woman president, I would prefer it not to be Kamala Harris.
There's not much time left for something like that to happen, though. We're talking like
2 years, less than 2 years. Yeah.
For sure. Rachel?
Talk about inflation and specifically the real estate market and what the Lord showed you regarding that.
Well, in March of 2022, I had a dream. I was given a set of headlines in the dream. The first headline that I received was the dollar drops 30% in value as the Middle East strikes oil deal with China instead of the United States. And from that began this spiral of inflation, the devaluing of the dollar, and intentional bad decisions by the federal government to basically force us into a digital currency. In fact, one of the reasons I believe that they haven't been concerned for years about balancing the budget or controlling spending is because they intended this to happen. If you create the problem, then you can give the solution. And that is, we can't fix this, so we have to go to a digital currency. We can't redeem the dollar. And right now you're actually seeing nations in Europe. Emmanuel Macron recently actually made a statement, we cannot trust in the American dollar. We need to invest in the Chinese currency.
We're already seeing those deals take place that you're talking about.
So you think real estate is not a good investment right now?
I think it will probably always be a pretty good investment because they're never going to make any more land than there already is. Right. But I do think the best is precious metals. But I do think there will be a housing crisis, and I don't think, and I don't want to get in the spirit of fear. I'm so much against the spirit of fear. Yes. But I don't think people realize how close we are to a financial collapse in our nation right now.
De Havilland?
Can you speak into that this thing of seeing a woman of color that you predicted about last year being one that would carry President Trump to the top of the ticket again and help restore his credibility, which was lost?
So at the end of 2021, I also saw this, and I prophesied it again at the end of 2022. I have saw several times in visionary dream-type encounters, a woman of color would come alongside in some capacity with Donald Trump that would actually help redeem his credibility in the midst of all the chaos, and that would actually help him gain enough support and gain enough, appreciation, and that I feel like that this woman will actually be the very thing that helps save his candidacy in the Republican primaries.
Oh, wow. Very interesting. Susie?
The conflict between China and Taiwan, how's that going to affect us in the U.S.?
So actually, I did a documentary on this. Back in 2018, I was first prophesying there were in the South China Sea, there would be a conflict between China and Taiwan, and that I actually saw military, exchange, and that the U.S. would be right in the middle of it. Now, it was unclear to me whether one of our ships would be affected, but that we would be there and have ships there to be a stabilizer, so to speak, and that we would somehow be affected by this attack against Taiwan, which I actually believe will be unsuccessful. I think Taiwan will push back China. And this is just like this weird dynamic of China is growing in the nations of the earth and spreading their tentacles and influence, but they're actually dying within the Communist Party. They're having an internal revolution simultaneously while they're trying to spread their influence in the world. It's a weird dynamic.
Wow. Yes. Well, you feel like the Lord showed you food shortages in 2023. And of course, we've seen some crazy stuff going on with chickens, now cattle, and what exactly did he show you, and when did he show you that?
So in March of 2022, the $50 bill dream I alluded to a minute ago, one of the headlines was that there would be wheat and bread imports would be at a stalemate, and that we would actually see food chain and supply chain shortages that would particularly affect third world countries worse than us, but we would still see the result and the effects of it. And I also saw disease among the animals. Back in 2019, I was shown that there would be beef and chicken contamination that would hurt the supply chain issues on top of what's going on in Ukraine. Ukraine's the breadbasket of Europe.
Right.
And the war there, it's going on, it's hurt their sowing season, their harvest season. And so not only is that in the mix, but also other things. I believe there is an intentional effort to hinder food and supply.
Well, and vaccinating with mRNA vaccines, we're hearing about that's happening.
They're talking about doing that to the food now.
Yep.
So if we eat it, then we'd be affected by it.
So the contamination isn't intentional.
Absolutely.
Okay.
We'll be right back with part 2 of our podcast right after this. Hello again. This is The Watchman. Please join us each week for an exciting and inspirational podcast dealing with angel encounters, heavenly visitations, near-death experiences, as well as modern-day prophecies that are relevant to us today. So tune in each week and share it with your friends. After all, they could use a little inspiration in their life, too. That's the Watchman on the Wall podcast, and now you can find us on YouTube. We return now with Chris Reed and his interview with Joni Lamb on the Daystar Network.
All right. Wow, Cindy.
Oh, goodness. Okay. What about, in the midst of these rising gas prices, the Lord showed you there was going to be a very costly oil spill that would affect the U.S., Florida, DeSantis.
Not Florida. No.
I know.
Not our beaches in Florida.
And I love Florida. I love Ron DeSantis. But yeah, I did. I saw some sort of costly oil spill that I prophesied for 2023. And it would be used by the climate extremists as another reason to get away from,
Go to electric.
Yeah, but I think this will be the third test for Ron DeSantis. The first one was COVID, and he handled it brilliantly, maintaining freedom in Florida. The second test that he had was Hurricane Ian back this past. By the way, this is all documented, time-stamped. In June of 2021, I prophesied there would be a once-in-a-100-year hurricane aimed for the Tampa Bay area. But afterwards, a great move of God would come to that area. That was the second test. And I prophesied that in June of 2021. We actually sent disaster relief from Morningstar down to help after, because we began to pray, and it didn't hit Tampa Bay. It went a little south, but it was aimed right for Tampa.
It was. It sure was, and took a turn.
Which was, people are like, what's the big deal about a hurricane hitting Florida? Well, that particular part of Florida hadn't been hit in like 100 years. And so it was like a once-in-a-100-year hurricane. And that was the second test. I think this oil spill will be the third test that he will have to pass for the future purposes that God has for him, which will be presidential.
All right, Rebecca.
A lot about King Charles. From the coronation to his brother. Speak about that.
Yep. So one of the things I saw was the stone of Scone. It is the stone that they believe actually ties back to Bible times. They think it was one of the stones that Jacob laid his head on. It's legend, but it's every British monarch has, when they've been coronated, has sat on this stone for over 1,000 years. It's kept in Scotland. And I was shown, back at the end of 2022, I prophesied this then, there would be some sort of controversy involving the stone of Scone when it came for the time of the coronation of King Charles. Since then, there are now headlines, articles, people can read on it. Scotland is not wanting to send the stone of Scone. So this seems like this is an exact fulfillment because I think it speaks of the division that we will see in the UK. And I do think King Charles is dealing with a level of health and depression issues. I think depression has come upon the royal family. But the other thing that I saw was that, and I prophesied this back in 2019, that the King's brother, the one that has had the legal problems, Andrew, thank you, that he would actually have a mental health crisis and become suicidal.
Wow.
All right, Rachel.
Goodness.
So you also received a prophetic word about famous people and what would be happening to them.
Yeah. So I was prophesying that there would not more than just athletes, but that, famous people in Hollywood, well-known world figures, would suddenly die of cardiac arrest. And I believe it's directly connected to the VACCINE.
Yeah.
And I'm laughing just because of how we have to be careful how we say that. But I strongly believe that this, since then, Lisa Marie Presley and others have suddenly died since I gave this prophecy. I don't think that they'll be the last, because I believe this vaccine was actually setting us up for a future mark of the beast.
I do agree. De Havilland?
Yeah, so you talk about Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will not be the leading Democratic Party ticket in the next election cycle. And you saw a man winning the Democratic nomination, but it was not Joe Biden. Can you speak into that?
Yeah, and we know in part, we prophesy in part, but I had the, and I only share prophetic words once I've had a third witness. And I have more than 3 times, number one, not seen Joe Biden leading the ticket in 2024, and that there would be another man leading the Democratic ticket in 2024 other than Joe Biden.
All right, Susie?
So this is very interesting to a lot of people. Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump, what's going to go down there?
Yeah, so I actually said, I started prophesying this. Mind you now, I was sharing this in December. This is all time-stamped and documented. I said that the media would call it the Ronald and Donald battle. That I saw a headline, Ronald and Donald battle, but that I still believe that DeSantis has a future as a president. I really do. Yeah. But I don't think it's his time. I still believe God is not done with Donald Trump. And honestly, I like DeSantis as far as personality. It would be easier to put a whole new person without all the baggage. But I think right now what we're seeing is sympathy. People that actually disdain Trump because of his personality have saw a line cross that's never happened. A former or sitting president indicted. And I think this is actually backfiring, because it's actually developing sympathy in the hearts for people towards Trump that maybe didn't like him, because they know if it could happen to him, it could happen to anybody else, and we're going to have to end to decide, are we going to vote personality or policy? Because his policies, we prospered, our nation was secure, we weren't starting wars, and our nation was in a good place. So are we going to just vote against him because we can't stand his personality, or do we want to save our country? Personality versus policy, and I think Trump will come ahead.
All right. Everybody wants to know, it seems like this is a never-ending subject, the Russian-Ukraine situation. What did the Lord show you about that?
So the week after the Russia-Ukraine war started, I had a vision. I shared this on various outlets. I shared it from Morning Star. I saw this ending. So in the vision, I saw Adolf Hitler in black and white, okay? And I saw him with his military advisors around him. He realized his military options were done. His allies had forsaken him. He had run out of money, and Adolf Hitler took his own life. The vision ended, and I saw Putin dead. So I think, I'm not saying that he's going to take his life, but I do believe that Vladimir Putin will not be around much longer. And I know this is a complicated situation. This isn't saying that Ukraine's totally right and Russia's totally wrong. I know there's a lot of corruption in Ukraine. But I also know there were a lot of good things about Putin. He took a solid stand against a lot of the woke stuff, said it's not coming into Russia. But something happened. The Lord showed me there was a vacuum of spiritual leadership in his life. And something happened, and it changed when he started consulting the occult, just like Hitler did. And I believe that's when it changed and everything started going downhill. And I think, barring the grace of God, this is how his life will end.
Okay, Cindy?
Okay, you saw as part of a major flooding in the eastern U.S., you saw a dam burst, which caused even more severe flooding, and it was a natural sign of another dam about to break in government corruption and lies, which also can no longer be contained.
Yeah. Well, first time I prophesied this publicly was December 1st, 2022, and then again December 29th. I prophesied, the title of the prophecy was Boxes, 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 Biden and Billionaires. And the prophecy was that there would be boxes found containing information that would connect the Hunter Biden laptop with the Biden family business dealings that would be found that would ultimately put the nail in the coffin, so to speak, that would cement the fact that basically everything Trump said that Biden was doing all those years, the Hunter Biden, these business dealings that he had no qualifications, he had no background in. I think once all of that comes out, and I think they're trying to hold it back as desperate as they can, as long as they can, but I think that coupled with the health issues will be the thing that causes Biden to not be able to continue. But yes, I think this corruption of this exposure of corruption, of using, you know, your office as he did as vice president, I'm speaking of Biden, and his son and other family members prospering once again from business dealings with China.
So have we seen that flooding yet as far as the dam breaking in the natural realm yet?
So I prophesied this, as I said, December 29th. The first Biden boxes were found January the 9th. So no, the dam hasn't broken yet, but the cat's out of the bag and you can't unring the bell.
Wow. Rebecca?
There's going to be a plane that mysteriously disappears, and it'll be having sensitive information.
I'm beginning to think this might have been the balloon, because I saw this plane carrying information, surveillance, that's what they were doing, that was going across the United States, and then it disappeared. Now, once again, I want to say, I can't say for sure, because we know in part, we prophesy in part, but I really believe this might have been that balloon, an aircraft, which is what I saw, an aircraft. The only thing I could compare it to was the plane that disappeared a few years ago, but I mean, it still could be something future, but I personally believe this may have been the aircraft that I saw, the Chinese spy balloon that disappeared, and it was carrying sensitive information.
And then they found it.
Well, you know, when we hear all these different things, a lot of times we'll have a tendency to be fearful, and but for me, it's encouraging, because God is showing us what's going to take place, and He has His hand on God's people and the church.
Yeah.
So we don't need to be fearful, but we need to be empowered with the Holy Spirit and allow God to use us in this day and hour like never before. And you agree with that?
Oh, totally.
Amen. Amen. Again, I want to mention his book, The Seven Spirits of God. I'll get you to come back and we'll do this. Well, I do want to thank Chris for joining us at the table. Be sure to check out his book, The Seven Spirits of God. It's available now. And for more on his ministry and other prophetic words he's shared, you can visit him online at morningstarministries.org.
Hello again, this is The Watchman. Please join us on our new video channel called Encounters from Beyond the Veil. It's the same exciting content as our audio podcast, but in a shorter, but yet a video format. Also, please subscribe so you won't miss any of our episodes. That's Encounters from Beyond the Veil, exclusively found on YouTube. Well, thanks again for listening. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends. Any comments or suggestions you may have, you can send to thewatchmanonthewall2020@gmail.com.
We encourage you to subscribe so you'll always be notified of our future episodes. Well, thanks again, and we'll see you next time on the Watchman on the Wall podcast.